right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to our latest webinar series, which is titled What Every Executive Should Know. In this series, we invite industry leaders and experts to have candid conversations about specific projects, topics, challenges they face within data in their industries today. So be sure to follow along. You can check out some of our previous webinars covering topics in data science, digital transformation, modern data warehouses, risk, visual analytics, and more. And these can be found on our website under our webinar archives. Today, we have an exciting session on data governance, covering at a high level, what exactly is data governance and why should you care? How do you succeed in data governance? Where should you start your data governance journey? And what is the single most impactful thing data governance can contribute as you productize your data in the monetization journey? A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, as well as any resources mentioned today, will be emailed to you in the next few days. Additionally, we will have some time for a few questions at the end of this webinar, so feel free to pose any questions you may have in the chat as we go along. And with that, I know we have a very full session, so I will be conscious of time and go ahead and introduce today's experts. Today we have Paola Saibene, Teknion's Data Governance Practice Lead. Paola has been a technologist for 26 years, having held multiple C-suite roles in large global organizations and having led thousands of team members to fulfill business missions and thrive despite constraints. Paola blends innovation, strategy, growth, security, privacy, risk, and governance into an ecosystem of high resiliency and strength, especially as it pertains to data and its valuation process. And then interviewing today, we have Teknion Senior Sales Executive with many years experience around data and analytics in various roles and industries, and a true data enthusiast himself, the great Dave Haas. And with that, Dave, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, Paula, I am super excited about today's session, but I will put one caveat out there. I know that we talk quite a bit about data governance, and one of the things that I constantly hear you talk about is that data governance as a topic itself is really dry and boring. But you also say, as part of that, that the benefits of a strong, healthy data governance program can produce results that are probably more exciting than anything else out there in the data world. So today, during our questions, I'd like to start very high level, very basic, and have you talk a little bit about what data governance is, but I'd like to really focus the bulk of our time around some of those benefits and the exciting parts of data governance. Does this sound good?
Sounds good, absolutely. And yes, it is perceived as a dry topic, and not too many people flock to data governance conversations, but actually it's a very exciting domain. So one of the things that we like to do at Teknion is to give a picture first. What does it feel like to have a really good data governance program in place? And the first picture that we come up with is this pit stop in Formula One. So we all know how important it is to be super fast during a pit stop. It wasn't too long ago that it would take minutes for the changing of the tires and anything else that needs to be done. And now we're up to 1.82 seconds where 4 tires get changed and who knows what else happens in that time. So in order to have, let's imagine, for instance, that the CEO of a company is the driver. And let's imagine that the car is the investment in the company or the company itself. So you have all of these individuals choreographed, super synchronized, very, very skilled, that in 1.8 seconds with surgical precision, get the job done. And that's because they've trained and prepared before, and it is incredible the precision they have. On top of that, the driver needs to stop no more than a couple of millimeters away from where the pit stop crew is. So that kind of synchronization and organization and preparation is like good data governance, helping the company and the CEO with execution of the most exciting initiatives, with innovation, with digital transformation, with monetization, with anything that is thrown their way, because it's well calibrated and they operate fast. So that's the picture.
I love that analogy. So, I mean, if you could just, what exactly is data governance, if we were to give a
Yes.
definition, and why do we care?
So a couple of ways of looking at it. One of the definitions that you'll find out there is, hey, it's the right data of the right quality, regardless of where it is stored or what format it is in. It's got to be available to the right people for the right purpose anytime. And that resonates with execs. Here's a longer definition that we like in Teknion because it's very comprehensive. So it's an accountability framework that is going to run through the creation, processing, consumption, management, valuation, and documentation of data. And then to succeed in that, you've got to have that clarity and discipline that gives you the strategic advantage in the access, analysis, democratization, sharing, and ultimately monetization of data. It matters because you've got to have some safe passage at some point in your initiatives to go to data valuation. It matters because you're going to be needing to know what your intrinsic data is in the organization, if you don't know that already, and what your extrinsic data is as you get close to dealing with partners that are going to want to share data or understand more about your data.
I love it. I love it. So, I mean, now that we've got kind of a definition, let's actually dive into some of the applications, the exciting part, right? The fun stuff. There's a few that I want to hit on today, but one of them I think that a lot of folks out there probably are interested in is AI. And I'm curious what your perspective is around data governance and its impact on artificial intelligence.
It has a lot of impact. Let's back up just a moment and understand that data is becoming not just an asset, but a product. So as a product, and from that perspective, you've got to be hitting some maturity levels to understand how to treat it well. AI, it matters a lot, definitely for the Board of Governance of the Federal Reserve. So when you, from a data governance perspective, if you take, for instance, the supervision and regulation SR 11-7, this is a standard regulation that has been imposed on financial institutions. And within it, there's a call for validation and control of algorithmic models that are based on the model risk quantification. So that in itself is part of an approach and rigor placed in data validity, reasonableness, quality, etc. That regulation then is the key component of an AI incident report, which, by the way, everybody should have an AI incident report response, I should say, if you're dealing with AI. And we can map that incident response plan to the business lineage of data governance and just cover the consumption and valuation aspect of it to help identify any flaws at the governance layer that make it to a model and passes on that flaw to a model potentially.
So anyone that is involved with AI needs to have an incident report response ready, prepared, not something they should just kind of try to wing once an issue comes up.
Right, and it's not just for cybersecurity, not just for privacy, but for AI as well. And in the financial institution, that has been a call out for a while.
Wow. All right. How about data governance and the impact in data science? Could you talk a little bit about that?
It is important, so much so that you will find the FTC convinced that it is. There's a commissioner called Rebecca Slaughter that I've been following for a while, and she's a strong advocate of consumer protection, and some of her focus areas really have been AI, data science, cyber, etc. She calls out 7 questions that she would ask any data scientist and that the FTC would want good responses for if there were any questions. And this is where data governance can help. So the first one is on fairness. Are the outcome or accuracy differences in model decisions across protected groups? Are you documenting the efforts? Are you fixing these differences as they come about? And this is where, with a good data governance program, you would directly tie that to the shared policies, the shared standards, and the procedures within that. A second point for her is privacy. Is your model complying with relevant privacy regulations? And is how are you proving that? another strong tie to data governance. Privacy has elevated itself within the data governance world to an enormous spot. It's taking up a lot of room, rightly so. So you've got, the BIPA law in Illinois, you've got the CPRA, CCPA in California, you've got a myriad of other laws across the country, plus the international ones such as the GDPR. And all of that converges into a need to calibrate the data governance program to be completely standardized in the measure that you can in practical ways, so that you can cover this and help the data scientists as they're using the data. Then you have anonymization, retention, legal basis. Again, FTC asking data scientists coming back to data governance saying help, so we don't have to do the big legwork on this. Security questions, have you incorporated applicable security standards? This is a great spot for data governance because you can leverage the controls in the ISO 27001, in NIST, in CIS, and have all of these applicable controls just be taken care of to some extent in data governance. And by the time it hits the security layer, then it is already an effort that has been addressed. You've got questions such as, is your AI system making unauthorized decisions on behalf of the organization? Again, back to access. Questions on negligence. How are you ensuring AI is safe and reliable? Part of that reliability, of course, has to do with the data itself. And that's an area of data governance. Transparency and third parties. So you see how the convergence begins to solidify the more you drill down on these questions and resolving them from a data science perspective.
Excellent, excellent. Let me shift gears a little bit and ask you what's your opinion on how we should be thinking about data?
It's a great question. So now we're going to put on our philosophy 101 hat. And this is a place that I love. So take the word data, right? It comes from the Latin datum. It actually means given. So data is given. It's not something that you just collect. It's something that you draw. If it relates to a person, it is given. And in French, in fact, les données, the word for data is that which is given or has been given. So this is something that you use to understand the evolution from HIPAA, PII, PHI, all the way to today's contextual privacy, which we don't have room to go into it today, and differential privacy. And you begin to go, whoa, there's more than just PI and PHI. The world is getting very, very complex. But just a little snapshot on differential privacy. It's a formal mathematical framework for quantifying and managing privacy risks. So differential privacy is going to be used by algorithms, by models, by data scientists, by AI developers, because they want to quantify in a way that they can prove they've done their due diligence. It can range from really simple statistical estimations all the way to machine learning. So there you have it. I mean, it's data. How you see data really matters, because then from a data governance program perspective and as an exec, you're going to want to put a certain level of importance on it based on that definition.
So, Paula, I know you've mentioned GDPR quite a bit here, and data is given, and it has to be treated with respect, and has to be treated in ways that is clear, right? What's being done with it. It seems like it fits really well into this piece. Great. Let me ask you one more towards, in general, about success. What does it take to succeed with data governance? I mean, you've put a great definition in place, right? But what does it really mean to succeed when you talk about data governance?
If you have a definition that sees data as a strategic asset, then you're going to succeed farther, in my opinion. So backing up just for a moment, there's a definition from Peter Aiken and Juanita Billings that says it best. Data represents an organization's sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset. You can't use it up. If properly maintained or governed, in my words, it cannot degrade over time or from use. It's an by accounting definition, it's a durable, persisting, beyond 1 year yardstick. that is used in accounting standards. So to succeed, first of all, you have to have a really clear vision and a relentless pursuit of it. You have to know what you're following in terms of a framework. Choose a framework. It may not be perfect. Just choose one and stick with it for a while. It could be the DAMA, the DIMBOK framework, and you can start focusing on the metadata, on the data quality, on the architecture. You can move to the storage, interoperability, etc. But make it very relevant to the most influential individuals in the organization. Is that your board? Is that your C-suite? Is that middle management? You've got to map it directly and strongly to corporate and board governance initiatives if possible, IT, information governance, be mindful of legal and risk and compliance, what is top of mind for them, be mindful of security and privacy, as we mentioned, and don't forget the ethics. If you have an ethics department in your organization, fantastic. What are they concerned about? If you don't, then this is a place through data governance to actually have something in place that is lasting. Connect all of that. It's actually much more important to connect the dots than to collect them. So one of the failures in data governance is a whole bunch of collection of stuff and not enough connection of it. From an exec's perspective and a strategic perspective, you need to connect all of those dots that are top of mind for execs. So let's move on. Connect the KPIs, not the departmental KPIs necessarily, but the strategic KPIs of the organization to your DG program, to the governance program. Connect your key risk indicators so that the triggers can come also from a data governance perspective and help alert execs and also allow for the KPIs to be to perform well, to show good numbers. And show an initiative. Show how you're going to help predict more faithfully the numbers that matter to the organization. Let's take retail. If you want to predict the consumer habits a bit more, then how are you enriching that metadata? What are you merging those data sets with? Do you have contractually obligations to do that? And having all of that connected allows the governance to remain very meaningful and right on the space that it needs to be relevant.
So how do you really do all of these things? And there's a lot there. Can you help us, with some concrete examples?
Sure. So let's start, for instance, with privacy and just basic obligations, right? It's things that you've got to do no matter what. If you are bound by the GDPR, or you are adopting the GDPR because it's a great standard and it just allows for a reduction of headache on the US state laws combinations. So the ROPA, the record of processing activities, you can actually get those done. Instead of having to form a privacy department for that, they're already getting done in a good business lineage format at the data governance level. Take the data subject access rights. Back to data lineage, good metadata, that is being captured potentially in a good data governance program if you have it incorporated. Take the data processing impact assessment. Once again, it's basic 101 for data governance, rarely looked at as such. And all of these different disparate efforts in the organization are happening at the legal level, at the compliance level, at the privacy level, because they're doing it there, but they can be done. Data governance is already being done from a just data management perspective. Let's move to IT governance. COVID, many shops are following COVID and combining controls within that. Some of those COVID standards actually fall within data governance. We leverage that, we consume that and produce results, but they're not necessarily joining hands with proper IT governance, and they're duplicating efforts, wasting time, wasting money, etc. You can move on to ERM and cybersecurity. From an ERM perspective, if you're, for instance, a financial institution and you're following the OCC standards, there's a lot of guidelines on things you need to get done at that level that can be taken care of, again, at the onset, at the creation level of the life cycle management of data governance. Cybersecurity, no brainer. There's a lot there that can be taken care of as well. One of the great examples I like to mention is, for instance, Tableau. If you happen to be using Tableau in your organization, there is a blueprint for governance there that includes anything from the Tableau online experience to the on-prem to data itself and mobility, and all of that forms part of the governance cycle, of which data is a huge component. And finally, some other examples, it could be at the records management level. Some organizations don't have a records management program. It could be expensive to maintain. You don't necessarily have to if you have it embedded in data governance and just following standards like the 23,081 is one of the standards to follow. Embedded as just one of the standard practices that stewards and champions of data would be following as a basic norm. And then some legal frameworks as well, 36,000, 31,000, etc. So you get the picture. Data governance is not a catalog, right? It's not just quality, data quality, not just policies. It's a whole bunch of things that are part of a mesh and a framework.
This is an interesting one that just came in. A question came in, and I was going to wait to the end for questions, but I think it kind of fits in pretty well here, Paola. So it's okay. I'll just ask you right now. The question basically is, how do we capture KPIs and highlight it to the C-suite? Like, that's something I'm sure that everyone out there is thinking about, right? Is the C-suite and how we translate all this back to them,
right,
with data governance.
Great question. Not every organization is capturing mathematically the KPIs. Many of them have goals and objectives, and they know at which level they need to be. So however your organization is doing it, they know what they need to fulfill by the end of the year, fiscal year or calendar year. They know the answers they need to give to the board or numbers they need to give to the board by the next quarter, by the next session. Work it backwards and see, of all of those objectives, goals, scorecards, how does it work backwards to due diligence on the expanded data governance framework, so that you can then create your own scorecard and show that you are helping meet those numbers. It is an exercise at first, takes a little bit of work, but then after you get it done, then everything is mapped back to your efforts being part of that quantification towards success of their efforts.
I love it. That's really cool to work backwards and create your own scorecard. Love it. So here's one I had for you that I think a lot of others struggle with this. I know I've heard it before, but the question comes up, do I really need to set up a program for this? Why can't each of the business units take care of portions of it, right?
Yes.
And have it, more distributed versus a formal program. Yes. What are your thoughts on that, Paola?
With the Vulcan Mindmelt program, no worries. We can do that. But this is a little bit like, having 4 mechanics with 4 sets of tools at different times, aligning your tires and changing them and different size of tires and thinking that the car is going to run well in the end. It'll get you from point A to point B, but it's probably going to be either painful or dangerous. So in IT itself, we've gone through the pendulum of centralized to decentralized, back to centralized. There's got to be a right balance there that works for the organization, but it's never one that is fully decentralized for data governance. Somebody has to orchestrate this. The saying always goes, well, it's everyone's responsibility. That actually means is nobody's accountability. When everybody's responsible, then nobody's really accountable. So we've got to have somewhere where the hub is created and where the hub gets to say, small or large, how this gets orchestrated with everyone's input and everyone's knowledge.
I love it. I love it. That's a great answer. So shifting gears a little bit, Paola, where do you see all of this starting to just fall apart at most organizations? When they start, perhaps they don't do it correctly, or they don't follow the right process?
The governance has a big tendency to fail. So that's why being strategic is so important, spending time in that space. Just a little longer than you would think, so that everything else can be accelerated. I see it fall apart when a framework is not properly followed, because then you can't measure. If you start combining frameworks and you pick supermarket style, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It feels great. You get to do what you want to do, but you cannot measure it as easily afterwards. So then you can't prove that this is worthwhile. So as a program, it tends to fail. I see it when you're about to go into a data monetization path. So you're not going to be able to create that data brief, that data catalog for the purpose of sending it to a broker or a data mart, and that sample file in a way that is very cohesive if you haven't had this framework set up, if you don't have the accountability, if you're not operating as one. You need to have a really good understanding of the value, again, of your intrinsic and extrinsic data. And you can't achieve that unless you have some form of centralization that defines that value. So it's not just the departments assigning. Data travels from point A to point B. It crosses several sections, departments, units. It changes value. But somebody, somehow, there's a unit that needs to be able to track that with faithfulness so that you know what comes out in the end and how you should be selling or bartering that data. And also from a privacy perspective, you could have units working on monetization, not knowing that there are contractual obligations that bind that or that disallow from certain type of partnerships to take place because it was not cohesively managed. And then the third one that I think where I see is fall apart is, do you really own what you think you own? So once again, coming back to legal, coming back to risk, and just asking the right questions. We may be creating the data, but we may have actually committed that data to another level of ownership. And that needs to be dealt with cohesively.
Thanks, Paula. Another big question that we hear is, do you need to run a data governance program inside of IT? Or is there another place where it should be?
You don't need to have it in IT. Poor IT, we just get stuck with everything. Whatever doesn't fit anywhere else, to send it to IT. But IT needs to be able to defend itself when it needs to push back if you don't want it in-house. So the main purpose of the program needs to be understood, that it has to have a strong connection to who the sponsor is and to those KPIs, those KRIs, those business initiatives. With that kind of heavy sponsorship, it can easily be placed elsewhere. The other part that I would advise to keep in mind, look at the output. This is just the input phase. The output is that AI monetization, etc. So who is going to benefit the most from that? Bring in parties that have that kind of transactional experience on the output layer and see who is the appropriate owner, or a combination of owners is fine. It's not about where you place it as much as do you have the right bodies within? Do you have the right stewards, strong stewards that will champion and fight for the right value of the data? And then you see that roll out better.
What is the single most impactful thing that data governance can contribute as you productize your data in this monetization journey? Let's kind of focus on the monetization piece a bit, because I know that's where a lot of folks have interest.
Yeah. By far, be strategic, and that does not come easily. So being strategic means more than just working it backwards, right? But understanding what the outcome that you wish to see from maturing this data will be 2, 3, 5 years down the road, and how that will impact your business initiatives, not just your decision making, but other business initiatives that you might have. So that is super important. Understanding your board or the execs, whoever is at the top of the organization, what is their worry? And what is their vision? From worry to vision, bring it down to a foundational component of your data governance layer. And that will give you the fuel that you need to advance. This can be, AI, data quality, catalog, whatever it is going to address that, either both the risk and the vision. And then take a look at all the tools that you have. So this is very similar to cyber. A lot of folks end up buying cybersecurity tools, and there's a bunch of networking tools that can address a percentage of those needs, but they just were not turned on, were not configured. You have tools right now for dealing with data in a variety of, whether it's a warehouse or it is data vaults or it is Tableau and visibility, etc. Take a look at what you have. What is your portfolio of tools, and extract the existing governance practices from them and begin to build without any expense. Begin to build those and then add to them what the gap is, what is left over. So maximize your assets right now.
Amazing. Thank you, Paola. So we've asked you all of our questions that we had canned up. Wanted to put this slide up. This is something you would put together, Paola, as a takeaway for everyone. So please, if you would like a copy of this slide, just reach out to us. You'll also get a link to the recording as well, and it will be there. But this is an extremely useful slide that I think kind of summarizes a lot of the key components that you've talked about today, Paola. Thank you very much.
Sure. Just one more thing, Dave, before.
Sure.
Just wanted to cover, that back to the single most impactful thing. When you create a product out of your data, you need to have the life cycle management that maintains it to raise its value. So if we take that accounting definition and we maintain and govern the data in a way that is constantly growing in value, then the single most important contribution is that cohesive and lasting orchestration. And that can be easily accomplished from a data governance hub. And it is just going to affect the quality, reduce the burden of responsibility from several folks, and latch onto a framework and a methodology that is lasting and that is understood across the organization.
Thank you. Rachel, I wanted to turn it back over to you and invite the audience as well to ask Paola any questions you might have.
Definitely. And great job, you guys. That was a wonderful session. Like Dave mentioned, if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat that can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or the Q&A panel that is also found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if we don't get to your question today, feel free to put your email there as well, and we would be happy to reach out to you guys. Again, this session was recorded and the recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. And I'm not seeing any questions at this time, but thank you guys again for joining us today, and we hope to see you in our next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paola. Thanks, Rachel.